Welcome to Breaking Ground. I'm your host, Devin Kolka. On this show, we meet with industry leaders in design, construction, and real estate industries. Today's guest is John J. LaValle, founder of John J. LaValle PC and Patriot Consulting Group. We're going to talk with John on TDRs and the Pine Barren credits. I'm really excited to have him on. Today we have John J. LaValle, former supervisor of Brookhaven, former county chairman of the Suffolk Republican Party. You did some work with President Trump on his 2016 election, and I know you still stay in contact with him. Currently, you have the Patriot Consulting Group, which is kind of what I want to talk about today, and you're doing a lot of work in the wastewater management world, and one of those items that you're working on and focusing on a lot is TDRs and Pine Barren credits. Nobody knows what the heck a Pine Barren credit is, and so I wanted to bring you on and talk about that and teach people what a Pine Barren credit is. So how did it start? When did they get together and say, we're going to put together these credits?
Well, if you remember back in, I guess it started, through the 80s, and I think right in the beginning of the 90s, maybe in the late 80s, legislation was passed, and actually my cousin, former state senator Ken LaValle, was the principal sponsor of the Pine Barrens legislation, wherein they came, because of the fact that we draw drinking water from the ground. We're in a very unique situation, so we had to kind of, pay a bit closer attention to what we're doing above the ground. And there was a region on Long Island, which is on the east end, which goes from Brookhaven through Southampton and Riverhead, where there's pine trees.
Barrens.
You'll drive through it, and it's called the Pine Barrens. And that region is very instrumental in providing clean water for Long Islanders. And the goal was to preserve that region, to protect our drinking water and our environment in general. But when they did, we have property owners. So the state comes in and says, we're stopping you from developing your property. We're not going to take your property, but you can't do anything with it. And that, obviously isn't a nice thing to do. So obviously government had to pay those individuals for their land. And what they did is they came up with this process wherein the property owner would apply to turn essentially their land into a certificate. Mm-hmm. That has a credit to it, and that credit could be used as a commodity on the open market. And through subsequent litigation and other legislation, it basically evolved that the local governments, wherein these these lands exist, Brookhaven, Southampton, Riverhead, that they would have to, if an individual, let's say a development company, comes in and wants to build a multifamily complex on a 1 acre zone property, they would then require them to purchase Pine Barrens credits in order to get the additional density when developing. Now, also the credits could be used for sanitary purposes, just wastewater purposes. So there's two purposes for the certificate where it becomes a marketable commodity. One's for density, one's for just, wastewater credits for, your sanitary. So, they created these certificates. They've gone up, they've gone down. They started low. They've been as high as $125,000 a credit or slightly more. And they've gone down as low as $25,000 credit.
Do you know how many credits were initially put out?
A lot.
A lot.
A lot. I mean, every parcel, every acre would be entitled to a credit.
And then once a credit is used for a certain development elsewhere, that's it. You can't get anything out of that credit. So there's only a certain amount of credits that are left there on the market for purchase by private developers.
Yeah, so I use the word commodity because that's exactly what it is. And as the credits are being used up, the credits that exist now become, it's a supply and demand issue. As the supply now, demand goes up and the supply is down, prices are going up. So right now, credits are on the rise.
So I'm assuming that there are certain property owners that are like, I'm going to hold on to this thing for as long as I possibly can, because at one day, there's only going to be a few left, and that price per credit is going to go up tremendously.
Correct. It's an investment. I mean, it's like buying stock. You're buying stock in a company. If you buy the credits, the certificates, and you hold on to them, it's highly likely they're going to rise, and they are on the rise. I mean, just a few years ago, I mean, we spoke earlier that roll back not even 10 years, credits were going for $60,000. Now you're talking close to $100,000. Between 90 and 100. And like I said, as the credits get used up and become a bit more rare, the price is going to go up.
Do you know how many are left on the market right now?
That is a definitive number. I don't have it off the top of my head, but there's the Central Pine Barrens Commission has a website where you can draw information about where the credits are, who owns the credits. Once a year, they usually put out a study showing what the average cost per credit was, which is helpful, but it's usually a year behind, and obviously. You understand real estate; it's a here and now. So, it's like if people start to develop again, and there's a demand because whether people, developers need for industrial projects for sanitary purposes, or you have other projects where they need it for density, the demand's going to start cranking up.
And it's a private negotiations. It's not a set number. So you might get a credit cheaper from this guy than this guy, and it's just
That's correct.
It's a commodity.
Yeah. And it's all everyone's circumstance. You may have a seller that they want to sell their credits because they're moving down south and they want to buy something. You may have someone just going to wait and wants as much as they can get for them. So it's like anything else.
Now you said the three towns that there are Pine Barrens: Southampton, Brookhaven, and Riverhead. Now, would I purchase a credit to go use in a property that are outside of those three towns, or I have to develop in those three towns? How does that work?
Well, obviously, if for instance, if I'm a resident of the town of Brookhaven, I may not want someone using a Southampton credit because remember, you're talking about when something's developed, they look at it. Hey, there's going to be more children in the school district. So there are certain laws that within the law there's certain protections for each town. So you can use a Brookhaven credit in Brookhaven. But if you're going to try to use it in a different town, that town has to vote to accept you using that credit. So it's not just, you can't just use them freely. You can use it, like if you have a Southampton credit, you can use it in Southampton. If you have Riverhead, you can use them in Riverhead. But for sanitary purposes, what happens is West End development, let's say your Smithtowns, your Islips, your Huntingtons, your Babylon, they'll take any credit for sanitary purposes. So, and by the way, you could use a sanitary credit anywhere. So if you're gonna, if the purpose of the use is for sanitary purposes, you can use it anywhere. But if it's for density, then you have to get, there's some home rule essentially law where if you want to take a Riverhead credit and use it in Southampton, the Southampton Town Board has to say yes, you can do that.
Now, there's definitely been a push on Long Island for more sewer treatment plants. Has it affected the market at all?
No, not really, because not every project is going to be suitable for a sewage treatment plant. As you know, the cost of the types of plants that are out there, if it's cost effective, you go that route. But oftentimes it's somewhat more cost effective to purchase the credits. It all depends on, how much sanitary you need. And, that's a whole other business. Just several years ago, there were a lot of problems with sewage treatment plants. A lot of developers, if a project went under, let's say just several years ago, let's say over a decade ago, it was a little bit of a problem because they were just abandoning plants that needed substantial upgrades, but the money just wasn't there, and it wasn't, the owner's interest to do anything, and they just bankrupt the corporation, flip it over to the county. So, I know that problem's been addressed to a certain degree, but I don't think the need for credits is ever going to go away by virtue of, the existence of sewage treatment plants. So
now, I'm assuming each credit allows you to have a certain gallonage, correct? Is that how it works?
If you're using it for sanitary purposes, yes, it would be, yes. And it all depends if you have a full credit. That depending on where it's from, it could be worth 600 gallons, it could be worth 300 gallons.
And that's based on the township?
Correct, and the location of the credit based on the zone.
Okay.
Yes.
And then if it's not for sanitary, how do you equate what that credit does for you?
Well, if it's not for sanitary, it's going to be for density. So that would be the prerogative of the town board when they approve, let's say, a zoning project, they would say, well, we'll give you, you know, 60 units, but you got to buy 3 Pine Barrens credits. That's entirely up to them. Very subjective.
And that's only if they're granting a variance, right? They would make that a requirement of the variance?
Yes, or of the change of
Of the
zone.
change of zone,
It
or-
could be a requirement of a variance,
But they
depending on what the
wouldn't
type of variance.
make you do that if it was an as of right use.
No,
Okay.
no, not at all. As of right, you get to build what you want to build. If you want more, then government has the right to say, okay, we'll give you more, but we want you to do this. And then
So if I'm a developer and I'm told
You
I
are.
need, yes, yes, and I'm told I need to go get a TDR, where do I start?
well, you can do a couple things. You can contact someone like me, 331-5800, and I will go out and hunt. Or, you know, you can just go on the website and look through it and start cold calling people. But generally, it's a small industry to a certain degree, like people that are involved in moving around it, because quite frankly, it's a niche, if there ever was one. Most people don't understand it. I know many attorneys that look at me and say, I don't know, you know it, I don't care about, just tell me what I got to do. And so you go find someone like myself and then go hunt the credits. We know who the active sellers are. There's people that own and are doing exactly what you were alluding to before. They're just holding. And they know that in a couple of years from now, that credit that, you know, was only worth, you know, 75, 80 grand, you know, 3 or 4 years ago is going to be worth 125 grand in no time. So it's like I said, it's a commodity that, you know, some people hold and some people are active sellers. So the key is knowing who the active sellers are so you can make it happen, you know, as quickly as you need it to during the course of your development project.
So once I close on the credit, what's the next step from there? What do I do? I bring that to my hearing? Like, how does that work?
Well, you turn it into government, if that's the purpose. So, for instance, if it's to a town and it relates to density on the project, you'll have to retire the credit to that, you know, that township. You bring, you know, you actually present them with the credit. You bring it to the commission and have the credit reissued in the town's name. So, you know, the initial certificate may be in the name of Devin Coca, but then you go to the town of Brookhaven. If it's part of your requirements for your approval, you then have the credit reissued in Brookhaven's name, and then you turn the credit into the town, and they take it. If it is obviously for sanitary purposes, it goes into Suffolk County, to the county of Suffolk, and that would satisfy, you know, your health department requirements, and that's where you would retire that credit. But ultimately, you know, now that property goes into government's hands.
So I know we are not in a perfect world, but say we're in a perfect world, that whole process of knowing I need to get a credit to turning that into government, how quickly can that get done?
It all depends. I mean, obviously, COVID has changed a few things, but generally they've been pretty good. They're moving things along. I mean, it's really just paper transactions. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go into the commission and you're going to present them with a copy of the deed and the property, and you're going to try to seek, you know, a letter of interpretation, which would then tell you what is the value credit-wise of that piece of property. Once you have that letter of interpretation, you then go close on your property, and then you come back to the commission and you turn it into a certificate, you know, issued in your name.
And today's market, how much is the credits going for roughly?
It depends on the town. You know, right now we're seeing Brookhaven start to really move up. I mean, it's at, you know, between 90 and 100,000 for a credit. You know, 95,000 is probably the ballpark where we're at now. Riverhead slightly less than that, maybe, you know, 75, 80. And Southampton's about 85, probably starting to creep up to 90.
Now, we talked earlier about the potential for the Pine Barrens to expand and issuing more credits. Is that strictly for preservation of land further?
Yes. I mean, there's certain areas that are in the compatible growth area, like, you know, certain, you know, properties that there's been talk about potential expansion. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. We'll see. That's going to take, you know, an act of government, but it's been talked about for years and really hasn't happened yet. Might it happen soon enough? Yeah. By the way, on the credits, we can talk about specific prices, but like anything else, you may have someone that needs to buy 5 credits. And if you're buying in bulk, you're going to get a discount. So it's, just so you know, it's not like if you needed 5 and the market's at 100, doesn't mean you're paying $500,000. You may get it for, 450 and save, so it's like any other commodity. If you buy it in bulk, you may get a discount. Usually do.
I imagine if and only if they expanded the Pine Barrens, that the existing certificate holders or credit holders, that their value goes down a little bit because they're now putting more into the market.
Could be. I mean, that's certainly, economics 101, right? So if they infuse a bunch more credits in, like right now, prices are creeping up because the amount of credits, the supply is going down. Okay, so we see that if they infused a bunch of credits into the process, yes, the price would probably plateau or start to go down again. But we'll see. There's the upside is governments requiring the use of them, which they should be, and it's not to penalize the developers of today. Fact of the matter is, as I'm not a political guy necessarily anymore, but I am a Republican. I believe in property owners' rights, and government stole people's property. Now, we can debate whether it's for a good cause or a bad cause. I think it was a great cause to protect our drinking water, and that has a lot of benefits for us health-wise and just making our region more beautiful and more valuable because it's rural and preserved. That being said, we still took land from people, and we need to compensate those people for taking their land. So, it's important that those people are properly compensated.
John, I really appreciate the conversation today. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.